makers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London with the conversations that matter, and here's what's coming up on today's program. OpenAI plans to hire the former chief executive of Twitch as investors and executives push to reinstate the founder, Sam Altman. Well, Microsoft's chief executive says Altman is joining the tech giant instead. Also on the program, we speak to the UniCredit Group Chief Economist, Erik Nielsen, on mounting speculation that the Fed is nearing the end of its tightening cycle. Plus, Javier Milei wins Argentina's presidency on a radical platform that includes plans to shut down the central bank and dollarize the economy. So let's take a look at the European markets map. Again, there's quite a lot going on. A lot of the focus will be on some of the data coming out overall in the week. But the focus is really just, once again, markets trying to figure out whether we've seen it, that's it for interest rate hikes. So the dollar extended decline, U.S. equity futures pretty much steady. Traders really currently pricing in about a 30% chance of a first rate cut from the Fed in March. That's a huge deal. I don't know whether traders then will double down on that, but certainly they're awaiting some of the minutes of the last Fed meetings. That's a little bit later in the week to understand some of the insight into policymakers' thinking. Now, a couple of corporate news that we're also watching out for. Of course, we're all over Microsoft to try and figure out exactly what happened at OpenAI and what happens next with Sam Altman. But shares tumbling in buyer. Now, this is after the company said it's stopping the main study of its top experimental drug. And it's also losing a key U.S. trial against its weed killer, Roundup. So you can see Bayer actually down some 17%. We'll see if there's any pre-market move on some of the other big ones that we're watching from the U.S. Julius Baer also warning of lower profit as credit provisions are jumping. So back to our top story, and OpenAI's board is said to have hired the former Twitch chief executive and co-founder Emmett Shear to lead the company. Meanwhile, the company's former chief executive, Sam Altman, will join Microsoft to lead its AI research team. Now, Microsoft chief executive Satya Nadella is said to have initially lobbied for Altman to be reinstated at the helm of OpenAI after a sudden dismissal last week. Well, Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie joins us with the very latest. Tom, I have to say, it was a crazy weekend. I mean, I remember being at dinner on Friday where it's like he's been ousted, and then you hear about these negotiations and try and get him back on. What do we actually know? I mean, is that it for Sam Altman at OpenAI because they have a new chief executive?
Well, it seems like this is the new future for Sam Altman. As you say, it was a whirlwind weekend, and who would have predicted last week that this is what we'd be looking at today? So, yes, Altman, along with Craig Brockman, the former president at OpenAI, joining Microsoft. That's been confirmed by Nadella in this post, who also says he remains committed to OpenAI. Microsoft have a 49% stake in that business. What we saw over the weekend was Sam Altman actually going to the offices of OpenAI. There was some disagreement over whether or not the board would actually bring him back in, because we know that senior executives within the business of OpenAI, and of course their important investors and Microsoft, wanted him back in. Ultimately, the board didn't acquiesce to some of those demands, and this appears to be the solution that Microsoft and others have come to.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It feels like there's two camps, right?
Yeah.
Pro-Altman, against Altman. So now we understand that he'll spearhead Microsoft AI's research team. If you look at the share price, I think we're pre-market, and actually Microsoft is up. So how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, Microsoft getting a lift on the back of this news. If you read it one way, they've got a camp or a foot in both camps. They continue to have their investment in OpenAI. We'll watch if that holds on the back of this. And now they have Altman and Brockman within Microsoft building out this new AI research team. Of course, Alphabet Google, they have DeepMind, and that's very much, of course, embedded within the Google infrastructure, and that's done huge progress and has made huge progress over the last decade. This is an opportunity for Microsoft, arguably, to close the gap on that front while still having exposure to OpenAI and all of their corporate clients. They have about 90% of Fortune 500 companies using ChatGPT and other tools that have been developed by OpenAI.
So interesting. Tom, thank you so much. Tom McKenzie, they are AI resident expert. Now, joining us to talk markets, UniCredit Chief Economic Advisor, Erik Nielsen, along with Bloomberg's MLive, Eddie van der Walt. I know you have a lot to say about OpenAI, but Eddie, let's go to you first on that. Eddie, it's a really pretty incredible story and how it's played out over the last couple of days. How much disruption are you expecting in the tech space?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think this is a coup for Altman, and it's a coup for Microsoft. And what it shows is just how much Microsoft is going all in on AI, right? I think they are taking the leading voice, from OpenAI, bringing it in-house, and showing that, so they're going to get a lot of, so they were the largest shareholder in this company, but now they've got 100% of, not 100% of the knowledge inside the company, but certainly they have the person who set the strategy that got the company to where it was. It shows just how big a deal this is. But at the same time, for Altman, right? I think, yes, it's great to have your own product and to take it to the next level and so on. But inside of Microsoft, he will probably be able to do much more. So I think this is actually a win for both of those parties. What it means for OpenAI, that's anybody's guess, because I think Microsoft will probably start to try and untangle themselves and go, use their own knowledge. But it does show that the tech sector is absolutely all in on this idea of AI. Microsoft already seen some of those benefits, right? They are picking up in search. I mean, I myself, I've switched from Google to Bing just because I get that artificial intelligence day by day as I do my searches and so on. So I think, and that's true for a lot of people. So I think the tech sector is I think this just shows that going into next year and the end of this year with the potential Santa rally on the back of further optimism on AI.
But Eddie, and I want to get to Erik in a second to talk about, the broader, I guess, democratic concerns, given that next year is going to be a huge year for the elections. Eddie, is this just boils down to whether we can do AI with an ethic lens? I mean, if you look at the business case, is this just pure business about these two companies and making money, or is it really the bigger question also on how this impacts elections, how this impacts how we view the world?
All of those things are absolutely crucial, and it is going to be more and more important as we get to next year with the US election. But at the same time, you've got to remember, OpenAI was founded on those principles. It was a response to, with Elon Musk and so on, working with others to try and get away from the idea of, AI at any cost and just, develop the technology at any cost. So I think Altman has shown that he has concerns about this and will take the technology seriously. However, there are many actors out there that will apply this technology in many other ways. And we don't really know how that's going to play out yet.
Erik, what's your take on this? Again, I mean, you're no stranger to turmoil in looking at the economy, and it's unclear whether, this turmoil on artificial intelligence could also impact the way we view the world, and so political decisions and therefore the economy.
Yeah, it's huge, right? It's fascinating, right, as far as I can see, because we have right now a very interesting race between the technology, which is exciting in many ways, but also frightening in many ways, right, in certainly the political contest. And we're running into big elections, as you said. So if the sector doesn't sort of get this right, the risk is that you get over-regulation, and that sort of kills stuff that we don't want to kill. So it's super interesting. I don't know how it ends up.
Yeah, so away from this, it's all about treasuries and markets and kind of will the Fed cut or not? Do you think they're too optimistic?
No, I think they will. So here's the issue. Inflation was on everybody's agenda, and now it's coming down so fast, even in America. And America hasn't even they've had 3% growth over the last 4 quarters, right? Europe has had nothing. So all the debate is about will they manage this sort of soft landing from a very high level. And if they are to do that, I suspect that they have to start to cut. And with inflation coming down, I think the odds are indeed that they will start here by the end of the first quarter, thereabout. I
mean, what's your take, Eddie? It feels like, market expectations for what the Fed does changes. So we're expecting bad news from the economy, and then after 6 months, actually, they surprise to the upside. So I don't know if this time is any different.
Yeah, Francine, I think it's really interesting the pricing that we're seeing for the treasury market, right? I think on the one hand, what we've seen over the last couple of days is a complete pricing out of any expectations of a hike. At the same time, there are some people expecting a cut. I think, therefore, you've shifted the median. It's almost like you've got a long tail distribution to the one end and a very sharp end of the distribution on the upper end of the range. And I think, therefore, you've shifted your mean of what markets expected, probably somewhere below what the median and the mode investor expect from the Fed. I think some people do expect there will be maybe some cuts. I think it will be because the Fed can cut, not because it is forced into cutting because they see the whites of the eyes of a recession. I think they will cut because they see inflation is coming down and they don't need rates to be as high, and therefore a preemptive cut rather than, all out. We've got to cut 50 basis points, 100 basis points because the economy is tanking. Because at the moment, there is just no indication that that's happening. The jobs market remains strong and the consumer remains strong. We've seen some, Walmart and a couple of other companies give us some warning signs there. But overall, I think the consumer in the US looks strong. And therefore, I think the pricing is probably a little bit pessimistic in terms of what is coming for the US economy. But I also think that is just a function of the fact that really nobody at this stage is expecting a hike anymore.
I mean, I do think it was a big deal, actually, that the Walmart chief executive was saying that he sees a disinflation when he looks at his price across Walmart. So we're seeing some pockets of price pressures, right, that are persisting, Erik. But are we actually in a global disinflationary environment?
We could be in 2024, not necessarily a disaster as one of those sort of deflationary sort of things that we economists we hate and we fear, but simply because we had this big hike in inflation and prices are coming down again. So it's very likely. In my native Denmark, we have zero inflation now, right? 0.1 on the last number, because it just automatically comes down. And I think in America the same thing applies to a lesser extent. So I think, to Eddie's point, remember, the Fed and the ECB, hopefully, they're looking at the forecast period. So they're looking about 6, 12, 18 months out. And if you were sitting at the Fed and said, what's the odds of what American economy looks like in 6, 12 months, I would say the overwhelming probability is that you have had a lot weaker growth. Maybe zero for a quarter or two. There's no excess savings among anybody about the very richest in America right now. So where will it come from, the continued strong growth? So I think with inflation coming down, exactly as he said, it's not like they must now, but there is a lot of room for the downside. And I completely buy the story the market prices that said this is not going to go higher now. We are at the peak.
Erik, yesterday, not yesterday, but last week also, we had a very important decision by the German court.
Yes.
And I know this is something that you spent a long time thinking about. Are we underestimating the long-term impact that this could have on budget deficits and how much they spend?
We are underestimating the complete mess in German policymaking because of these rules and the power of the Constitutional Court, right? So in the short term, what does it mean? It means that the overwhelming probability is a lot smaller deficit in Germany in 2024 because all these extra budgetary or gimmicks they had done to circumvent their own rule has basically been put aside. What does that mean? It means that they are going to cut stuff they can cut, and that's investment. And that has long-term negative impact because they're not going to go out and cut pensions, right? Or they can't fire people in the public sector overnight. So it's a return to some version of the Schäuble years of austerity, where you cut what you can cut politically. So it is and the deficit will be much smaller than it need to be. So it's a disaster.
Erik, thank you. We'll get much more on that. He's not mincing his words. Erik Nielsen there of UniCredit, and thank you as well to Eddie van der Walt from our MLife team. Now, coming up, libertarian outsider Javier Milei wins Argentina's elections on the promise of a radical economic shakeup. So more on market reaction with UniCredit's Erik Nielsen. That's coming up next, and this is Bloomberg. Libertarian outsider Javier Milei will become Argentina's next president after he beat the economy minister Sergio Massa in Sunday's runoff election. Now, Milei has promised a radical economic shakeup, including dollarizing the economy and scrapping the central bank. Well, Bloomberg's Rodrigo Orihuela joins us. Rodrigo, I don't know if it's a surprise, but certainly a lot of his policies, when he announced them, were a surprise to markets.
It's a surprise as far as the character goes. chainsaw policies, speaking to the dogs, the whole full package. As far as the actual polls go, 3 months ago it seemed he was set to be the winner, but a month ago, after the first round, his chances were much slimmer. It seemed as though Massa stood a chance. The thing is that over the last month, Massa went a bit over the top with, handouts and also certain desperation to try to show he could change. And I think that's the big word you hear in Argentina right now, which is people just want to change, even though Milei seems like a really, really high risk as far as his experience and, as you say, his promises go. So in that sense, it is a bit surprising, and everybody has this expectation to see where are things going to go from here.
I mean, it'll be fascinating to see first of all, the things he's promised, including dollarizing the economy. I mean, that's not easy. It could create shockwaves. I mean, is he actually going to go through with it, and what are markets watching out for?
So there are two elements to this. On one hand, his promises are really outlandish in some sense. I don't think there's ever been a president or a prime minister who's tried to put these type of policies in place, and he's really convinced. He actually has the intellectual framework, if you want, to defend these ideas. However, he has about 15% of Congress support, so his power in Congress is very limited. However, he's working with the former president, Mauricio Macri, who has much more clout within Congress, and Macri wants to play the role of adult in the room a bit. The question is, will this be able to work out or not? Experience shows us that people outside of government trying to control the president isn't always viable. So we'll see whether Macri ends up controlling him or not. What are markets expecting? To see who his economy minister is and what are his first policies going to be. We have 3 weeks of a transition, and this is where he's going to start setting the lay of the land ahead of his government.
Rodrigo, thanks so much. Rodrigo Orihuela there on the very latest of the Argentinian election. So let's get more on what this could mean for Argentina's embattled economy with the Group Chief Economist at UniCredit, Erik Nielsen. Erik, I mean, I guess, even if some of the ideas are good, or could be good, or could be considered good, because he was voted, I mean, is it even viable in this rules-based system that we live?
I doubt it, but I'm biased. I'm a macroeconomist of sort of the old school, and these sort of enormous changes, at a minimum, gives you a lot of uncertainty and moving these bureaucracies around to do these extreme things is unlikely. But as your colleague said, to me the key issue is we are getting a president with zero experience in governance, period, right? So that's uncertain. And he has no majority in parliament. He has no governors, I believe, and 15%. So he relies on Macri, and I can understand from an Argentinian point of view that you have 150% inflation. You're not voting for anybody incumbent, right? This hasn't been managed well, right? So you're desperately looking for something else. The problem is that dumb something else let me put it this way, is not hammered out in a detail where you could say, yeah, I can see a way through this. And I mean, the dollarization being your perfect example of an extremely radical move where there's no evidence that the Argentinian economy is done better by being run monetary policy from Washington than from Buenos Aires. So I'm very skeptical.
What's your take on the UK? So we have the autumn statement, and again, there was a lot of talk about possible tax cuts, but now it seems that they don't want to promise anything too soon. It has to be funded. What are you expecting from the UK as we get into election year?
Yeah, I think so. Election year, and there was a little bit of extra money in the bank now because of inflation and what have you. So they talk about the small rate cuts and the tax cuts, or whether you can have for the wealthy or for the inheritance tax or for the weaker part of society. Here's the issue: the UK collects about 40% of GDP in tax revenue. That's a 5 to 7% less than, say, Germany and many of the continental Europeans. And the British people, as far as I can see from the opinion polls, want, broadly speaking, the same social system as in Europe, and they want the same defense and military capability as almost like the Americans. So they are starting by having a hole of, say, 7% of GDP before we even get started. So this is really shortism if you're talking about tax cuts at this stage. So I'm a bit nervous, but it's election year, so coming up. So
we don't know what happens. Erik, thank you so much. As always, promises are made. Some promises are kept, others aren't. Erik Nielsen there of UniCredit. More of the big stories, moving markets, coming up next. And this is Bloomberg. Now let's get some of the other top red stories on the Bloomberg terminal. And Elon Musk has dismissed reports of him being anti-Semitic as bogus and that it could not be further from the truth. Now he sparked an uproar last week after agreeing with a post on X that claimed Jewish people held a, quote, hatred of white people. Now the news came as a range of advertisers halted spending on X, including Disney and Apple, after a report found their ad runs next to the pro-Nazi comment. Now, Bill Ackman, though, has defended Elon Musk, saying that while he wasn't perfect, the world is in a better place because of him. And the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration says it will oversee an investigation into the explosion of SpaceX's Starship during its second major test flight. Now, the most powerful rocket in history took off successfully from Texas, but SpaceX said a flight termination system was activated as it attempted to reach orbit. Still, analysts say it was an improvement from a first test flight, which also saw the rocket destroyed after multiple engine failures. And Citigroup is set to start a round of job cuts as soon as this week. It's part of the first major wave in Chief Executive Jane Fraser's overhaul, aimed at simplifying the lender and getting rid of 5 layers of management. Now, coming up, when one door closes, a window opens, or in this case, Windows. We'll have more on Sam Altman and Microsoft next. This is Bloomberg. OpenAI plans to hire the former chief executive of Twitch as investors and executives push to reinstate founder Sam Altman. And now Microsoft's chief executive says Altman is actually joining the tech giant instead. Plus, Javier Milei wins Argentina's presidency on a radical platform that includes plans to shut down the central bank and dollarize the economy. And the U.S. says a hostage release deal with Hamas may be at its closest yet. Meanwhile, Israel releases a video, it says, showing a tunnel beneath a Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, OpenAI's board is said to have hired the former Twitch chief executive and co-founder Emmett Shear to lead the company. Meanwhile, the company's former chief executive, Sam Altman, will join Microsoft to lead its AI research team. Microsoft chief executive Satya Nadella is said to have initially lobbied for Altman to be reinstated at the helm of OpenAI after a sudden dismissal last week. Let's go now to Azim Azhar, author of the Exponential View newsletter and also host of our wonderful new series of Bloomberg originals called Exponentially. So, Azim, first of all, congratulations on the show and the newsletter, both really engaging. This is a crazy story. I mean, I had to take a double take on Friday when Sam Altman was dismissed. Do we understand the motivation of people that wanted him out and Microsoft that wanted him in?
That's right. Well, I think the people who wanted him out come from one of the 2 key factions within the AI community. There's one group that believes that artificial intelligence could become unaligned with human values and our own ambitions and survival. And there's another group that says that that risk is hugely overblown and there are many other benefits and there are many other risks we need to pay attention to. And I should say the scientific community does not have consensus on this particular question. It was the existential risk group that seemed to have won out on Friday and ejected Sam Altman with very little notice from the firm. The twist in this tale, and don't leave your chairs, don't go and get coffee as I did, is that it's moving really quickly. And Satya Nadella at Microsoft has moved extremely fast to pull off what will be seen, I think, as a business coup to bring Altman and his lieutenant Greg Brockman into Microsoft with the backing of the firm's hundreds of billions of dollars and all of that enormous compute in its Azure cloud systems to enable them to build new products and do new fundamental AI research, but directly under the aegis of the Microsoft umbrella.
So, Azim, what's the turmoil about? I mean, I know there's a big investment from Microsoft, of course, in AI, and there's like a $13 billion bet on OpenAI and its former chief executive. But is this also, you know, like board against board, and how does it change the landscape for the sector in general?
Well, I think we will have to wait for OpenAI to disclose more about the reasons behind the timing for ejecting Altman on Friday. And the new CEO, Emmett Shear, has said that he will have an investigation underway as soon as he starts to try to unpick what went on. But what I think is clear is that the group within OpenAI that thinks that AI development should go much more slowly has won at this governance level. But that will mean that many OpenAI staffers will leave. Some will follow Sam, some will join Alphabet or Apple or Amazon, and others will start up their own companies. And I think that breaking up of OpenAI, which had become a lodestone and a center of power within the artificial intelligence field, will be beneficial in terms of competition, in terms of the rate with which new safe products are developed and the way in which businesses will be able to use them. So I think from an economic and a business standpoint, it's generally very, very interesting with quite a lot of upside.
So, Azim, when can you tell us more about Sam Altman joining Microsoft? Is it possible that you have these two factions, and I'm sure there's more than two, like the faction with conscience and the ones that want to go much quicker?
Yeah, well, I think once Sam is within Microsoft, he will have access to a lot of the resources that would have otherwise been constrained once you're in, when you were in OpenAI, and I think that they will move pretty quickly. But again, Microsoft is a firm that has a strong sense of its own social purpose. If you look at its commitments towards climate change, if you look at its commitments towards privacy, and just last week, the specific commitments they made to try to ensure that 2024's elections around the world are robust to the extent that Microsoft can do that through its tools and its infrastructure. I mean, I think that Microsoft will be quite thoughtful about the way in which it builds this technology and the way in which that it deploys them. Now, that might not be enough to satisfy the people who are on the extreme end of the safety ideology, who are very, very worried about existential risk. But I think for the rest of us, I think we would have some sense of confidence that Microsoft is a grown-up firm and is not looking to break the China shop.
Azim, I mean, this I think is a crucial question, actually. And, we met with some U.S. officials last week really worried about just the fairness of elections across the world because of AI, because of some of the stories that have been pushed. I mean, as these tools, generate text, generate images and computer code, like what are some of the safeguards that I guess each company will put in place for 2024? Like, do you worry about this?
Well, I think it is going to be a risk, a big risk, and I'm sure that bad actors will make use of the tools in the way that they made use of social media and the way they have used whatever's been at their disposal to weaken the underlying infrastructure that allows democratic societies to be democratic. So they have new tools at their disposal, but I think we're also aware of them. So we can expect firms like Microsoft, and not just Microsoft, to step in to monitor how their products and services are used, to be very proactive about stopping malfeasance and bad behavior. And I'm sure that they will do rather more than our government and public sector will be able to do, given that they are generally more agile and they have more resources at their disposal.
Azim, thank you so much for all, of course, of the news roundup. Azim is our author of Exponential View and host of the Bloomberg original series Exponentially. You shouldn't miss both. So you can, of course, watch everything online. You can watch it on TV and also subscribe to Azim's newsletter. Now, the story is the focus of today's Big Take. Subscribers can read the full analysis on OpenAI on the Bloomberg terminal and on Bloomberg.com. Now, switching gears, and Moody's has raised Italy's credit rating to stable, meaning the country is no longer in imminent danger of being downgraded to junk status. The move is a win for the Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, after 15 months in power. Well, let's find out more on this from Bloomberg's Tommaso Ebhardt. Tommaso, I mean, this, for some, was actually quite surprising, given the debt load to GDP that Italy still has. But what did Moody's say about their decision?
Buongiorno, Francine. It's a crucial decision for the country, the one made Friday night by Moody's. It was closely watched by investors, and Moody's essentially saying that the country's finances are stabilizing, which is good news for Italy. Couple of numbers to put in perspective: Italy pays about 200 billion euros every year in interest payments. So imagine a cut to junk, how much it would cost to Italian taxpayers. Moody's clearly gave a more rosy outlook because he not only didn't cut to junk, but also raised his outlook from negative to stable. It's clearly a win for Giorgia Meloni, also for the country itself.
So what does it mean, actually, that she can do going forward, Tommaso? Is it good politically? Can she reshuffle, the cabinet and her administration because she feels stronger? Or does it just mean that markets and investors will look at Italy more in depth?
So I think it's interesting to show that Giorgia Meloni, who is the most right prime minister that Italy had since it became a republic, came with an aura of being a populist and popular. And on the other side, the policy of her government are much in line with the one of the previous administration by Mario Draghi. A few hours before the Moody's decision, we interviewed here in Milan a close ally to the Treasury Minister Giorgetti, his undersecretary, who said that the North Star of their policy is keeping debt sustainable and looking at the debt and how investors look at Italy. So while we read the headline on Meloni's policy, who can be anti-systemic, on the other side we see the Treasury very close to what Draghi did. So at the end of the day, Giorgia Meloni's government is clearly in line with her predecessors.
All right, Tommaso, as always, thank you so much. Tommaso Ebhardt there, our Milan bureau chief. Now, here in the UK Chancellor is set to release his autumn statement on Wednesday. Jeremy Hunt says he wants to take, quote, a path to a lower tax economy. Meanwhile, the opposition Labour Party remains well ahead in opinion polls. So for more on all of this, we have our UK correspondent Lizzie Burden here with me. So, Lizzie, first of all, how important is this statement from Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives heading towards the general election? I mean, everything has to be seen through that lens.
True. And we've got a 20-point poll lead for Labour, as you say, and they haven't been able to narrow it even through the party conference speech, the King's speech. So this is one of the few remaining set-piece opportunities to close that gap. But Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is in a very difficult position. Yes, he's going to want to take credit for halving inflation before the end of the year. That was the government's self-set goal. He's already been on the airwaves making that case. But he doesn't want to be seen to be managing Britain's decline. At the same time, though, he's very fiscally constrained. With the election looming, you've got his Tory backbenchers clamouring for tax cuts. The question is, which can he afford without stoking inflation? So he's going to have to get a lot of political bang out of not a lot of fiscal buck.
Yeah, a lot of people say, well, he'll have to be creative in how he finds the money. But then, I mean, we had a great analysis by Erik Nielsen in doing the parallels, for example, with Germany and how much tax they have and how much they spend. What are we expecting then in the autumn statement? Yeah, he's not only going to have to be creative about what he does, but he's going to have to be creative about how he packages it optically. We know that the Treasury is considering cutting inheritance tax. That could look very difficult optically when we're in a cost of living crisis, and we know that they're also considering changing welfare to try to encourage people out of economic inactivity to save some money as well. Maybe they'll instead go for a bigger lever like income tax, but as I say, that could be expensive and stoke inflation. So perhaps they'll pull out of the Sunak playbook and pledge to cut inheritance tax just down the line. Or maybe they'll go for stamp duty, the property transaction tax, which could be less inflationary. Maybe we'll get some clues from the Prime Minister. He's speaking later today at 11 a.m. and we're also going to hear from the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt this afternoon. He's got a fireside chat with the CBI, so I'll be heading over to watch that. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lizzie Burden, there with the very latest on the UK autumn statement out Wednesday. Now, coming up, the Nigerian Central Bank postpones its rate meeting for a second time since September. Plus, we also have news from Zambia. That's up next, and this is Bloomberg. The conversations that matter, the insights you need. This is The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Nigeria's central bank has postponed a meeting of its Monetary Policy Committee for a second time since its new governor was nominated in September. Investors had been looking to the MPC for signals on how it will rein in inflation that is accelerating at the fastest pace in 2 decades. Now, for more on all of this, let's bring in Bloomberg Africa's Jennifer Zabazaja. Jen, good morning. What a great day to get us started on Monday. So what is behind this latest postponement?
Right, Fran, I mean, you just mentioned there, I mean, there's been a lot of eyes that are paying attention to what this MPC meeting was going to be on Tuesday, because as you mentioned, in October, we saw inflation quicken to the highest in 18 years, reaching an 18-year high. And so the expectation was really that we were going to see the new central bank governor, who was recently installed into this role, potentially hike interest rates tomorrow. Now that meeting has been postponed to an undetermined time, and it's causing a bit of concern. I mean, as we mentioned, of course, inflation is top of mind, but there's also expectations for inflation to increase even more. Barclays even estimating it could reach 30% in the next few months. There's also the issue of the Naira depreciation and the currency issues around the Naira. And so all eyes were on this Nigeria NPC and really on a number of other African economies and central banks that were potentially going to deviate from what we've seen in the Western world and elsewhere and hike interest rates. And so the fact that this meeting is now being postponed, the questions are, what does that mean then for inflation and really for monetary policy going forward? Now, just on that note, there were some expectations that if the central bank were to have the meeting tomorrow on Tuesday, they were potentially going to raise interest rates between 25 basis points and 325 basis points. So definitely something that a lot of analysts were paying attention to. Now we're going to wait to hear from this new central bank governor, where he's potentially going to be speaking at an event on Friday, though still unclear when we're going to have that official MPC meeting on the books again.
Jen, we've also had news from Zambia. So what happens now with the restructuring negotiations?
Right. So it's a bit of a stalemate right now, Fran. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that we were applauding the fact that Zambia had reached an agreement with the official bondholders. Now what we're hearing from their official creditor committee, which is co-led by China and France, is that they're not accepting the terms of the Eurobond deal. So in particular, they're saying that the specific agreement is not comparable in terms of what the haircuts that they were having to take on. And so now it sort of leaves this restructuring plan of nearly $3 billion. There's questions about what's going to happen next. And there's questions about, where Zambia's restructuring of the economy and the path forward, what that looks like, and also what this means for other countries that are under similar terms of this G20 common framework, what that means, because there's still very clearly a divide over how different lenders and different creditors take haircuts when it comes to this debt restructuring. But a lot of surprise there, and we're still waiting to see really where the next shoe is going to drop when it comes to Zambia restructuring. But very important when we think about debt restructuring in the African continent, because Zambia was the first big African nation that defaulted on its debt. So we're going to pay attention to what happens next and how this unfolds between the lenders.
Jen, thank you so much, Jennifer Zabazaja there in Johannesburg. Now, lots of news from the continent this morning. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, announcing more funding for climate projects. He meets with African leaders in Berlin today, including President Tinubu of Nigeria. Now, here's what else we're looking out for today. BOE Governor Andrew Bailey will give the Henry Plum Memorial Lecture on food security. Tomorrow we get FOMC minutes, and then later in the day, NVIDIA releases its third quarter earnings. On Wednesday, the UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt delivers his autumn statement. On Thursday, it is Thanksgiving. US markets will be closed, but in Europe, the ECB releases its October meeting minutes. And then finally on Friday, Germany's IFO survey results come out and the Black Friday weekend begins. Now, this is the latest news on Sam Altman. It's certainly been an eventful 3-4 days. Altman and Brockman will be joining Microsoft. This according to Mr. Nadella. You can see Microsoft pre-market gaining some 2.5%. Coming up, the latest on hostage negotiations as Israel releases a video of what it says is a Hamas tunnel beneath Gaza's largest hospital. More on the Middle East next. This is Bloomberg. The U.S. says the deal to release hostages taken during the Hamas October 7th attack on Israel may be at its closest yet. This comes as Israel releases a video it says proves the existence of a Hamas tunnel beneath Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, which the military raided last week. Well, Bloomberg's Mark Champion joins us now on this latest story. So first of all, Mark, what do we know about the hostage situation?
We don't know much for certain. What the Washington Post initially reported was that the deal is close, that there are roughly 50 hostages involved who would be released, women and children, that what would be tied to that is a humanitarian pause in the fighting, some 3 days to 5 days. But there is no deal as yet. The U.S. administration has said so. The Washington Post actually had to correct its story. We wait. These talks have been going on for a long time.
Mark, if Israel doesn't actually minimize civilian casualties, do they start losing the sympathy of everyone around the world?
They already have. I mean, this is a real problem for Israel, I think. They have, the initial sympathy that was there for the horrific attacks on October the 7th quickly began to erode. The numbers, upwards of 11,000 now Palestinian civilians who've been killed. It's a very significant problem for them. It's a problem for the United States. You just had to read President Biden's op-ed to see how he's trying to balance everything, at the one time stay behind Israel and the tactics that it's using, and at the same time to put pressure on them to stop.
You understand this, better than most, and also some of the military tactics. I mean, with the ground offensive, can you minimize, casualties more than bombs?
With either, any urban warfare tends to involve high civilian casualty rates. And this is a more densely, populated area than most. Certainly they could have done more at the beginning when a lot of these casualties were incurred. They could have waited with the air campaign until they had moved people out. Most are now out, but at the time that the air campaign was done, it wasn't. These things are catching up with the Israelis.
Israel actually released this video that we just showed, showing some of the tunnels. Is this to gain sympathy? Like, how necessary is it that people understand what we're looking at?
It's critical. So essentially what the Israelis are saying is, look, we're sorry, we have to do this. The civilian casualties are not our fault. It's the fault of Hamas. And there's a great deal of truth to that. Hamas, conducted this operation in the full awareness and with the desire to get the Israelis to come in. It is a part of their planning. But the problem for the Israelis is that they have to show that indeed Hamas is underneath the hospitals, underneath civilian infrastructure, which then at least gives them some kind of rationale for the death toll, and to say that it's Hamas's fault. The problem really is that what they've shown so far is well short of what they claimed.
Thank you so much, Mark Champion, there with the very latest on Israel-Hamas. Up next, Bloomberg Brief. Danny Berger in London, Manus Cranny in New York, and this is Bloomberg.